desirable or best, it was still deemed hazardous, even though it was an area that was flourishing. And we'll have to break Sugar Hill down, but they were boxed in. So it really didn't have a lot to do with economically disadvantaged folks as they try to paint the picture, as it had a lot more to do with discrimination. Because we do want to keep in consideration that this was 1933, where they did still have, colored only signs and white only signs still up. So this was a designated and direct approach to squeeze out those who were in these communities, which was black and non-white individuals in these communities, which we're going to go over today. But as you see, like it states red line. So they put all of them in this zone and ensured that they were left out of that opportunity to transfer wealth. And as you see, there's lingering impacts from that today. These areas that are red are still red now. So you can see when they laid this foundation and they established it, they've also maintained and expanded. And we're now in the refinement stage of this redlining that was put together by a government agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And this was a part of the New Deal from Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933. Now, an article that I was looking at here shows that let me stop my screen share real quick and pull up this article that I want to go over here. All right, because we want to talk about Duval. So, introduction to redlining, what it is, and what is redlining, and how it impacted Jacksonville. So, shout out to the LISC stories, and this article was here in 2021, October 29th. But it does show some of these maps as well, because I'm sure some of you probably never even seen these maps that were created by the HOLC to make sure they did not provide any relief to Black communities at the time. So when you hear folks who are talking about, I'm sure some of you have heard your great grandparents or grandparents talk about how they were squeezed out of economic growth. And you may hear some of that now, and people call it woke and all these other terms. But this was a practice that was actually established and implemented by the United States government. And I don't say this to do anything more than provide the truth. These are things that are documented here. I'm going to go over a more recent case to show that in about 100 years, we're still dealing with the lingering effects, and there hasn't been any economic relief in these areas to date. So this is something that is to bring awareness. It's not to bring hate. It's not to finger point, but just to bring awareness to those who really may think that this is something of the past, and it's something that's still predicated and still ongoing today. So as you'll see, right here, they're discussing what I was just talking about, the residential security maps, and it identified neighborhoods that were considered low risk, labeled A and B, moderate risk, labeled C, where they would make loans, and neighborhoods deemed too high risk, where they would not lend at all. So anywhere there was hazardous, they didn't lend to them. So as a result, and what they're labeling as is BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those communities were placed in red. And they had a red line that they drew around them. They placed them in the red zone and said they were high risk. So they pretty much eliminated anyone in that high risk zone, any access to that relief for refinancing or any home improvement loans that they needed. Because let's face it, during the Great Depression, everyone was struggling. Even your more economically stable individuals were struggling. So of course, those who were deprived, especially in the Black communities in the 30s, they absolutely were struggling. And I'm a fan of those that need the most help should get the most help. I believe that's true justice. I believe that's true balance between people, which I myself am a fan of. I'm nowhere, any shape, form, or fashion, a fan of redlining, where you're literally targeting those based on their race and color, that they don't get the relief that others were afforded the opportunity of, and to date can still, pass down that wealth. Me being a mortgage professional for as many years as I've been, I've seen folks who've been able to buy houses at a young age because their parents had equity in a home, and they can do what's called a gift of equity, where they can take a loan out against their home. Maybe they have 100, $200,000 worth of equity. They can gift their son or daughter-in-law, son-in-law, grandson, if you will, 50,000 for a down payment and closing costs to buy a new home. And that's how they're able to stimulate their wealth and be able to continue to be homeowners in their families and be able to pass that down. Where the ones who were in this hazard zone, they weren't given that opportunity. In fact, they lost equity because of redlining, because they were deemed as a hazard zone, and the appraisers worked with the organizers for the HOLC. They lowered the values of these homes. They lowered the values of homes that were in that hazard area and avoided lending to them at all. Didn't lend to them at all. Now, I'm sure we got folks from Dunn Avenue, Lim Turner, Edgewood, Main Street. I'm sure y'all can talk about how at one point your great grandparents, grandparents, great great grandparents owned all this land, owned all these properties, and now they're not worth anything. And still today, still not worth anything because of the impact from redlining. This is something that's still going on today. And as you'll see here in the article, in Jacksonville, redlining was implemented in 1937. You see, it was going city to city to city across the nation. They designated the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities as too risk or hazardous, as we see here, and they have the map too. They have the maps here too, and had no market value. Like I said, they lowered the market value because they said these were hazardous zones. So they're right there in Northwest Jacksonville and the historic East Side. Shout out to my folks over in Arlington. Shout out to my folks in Arlington off Justina, off Fort Caroline Road. Yeah, I know about Jacksonville. That's my stomping grounds right there. University. Shout out to my folks on 8th Street. The mortgages weren't available to the homeowners in the hazardous zones. And as a result, homeowners could only hope to sell their home to those who would pay cash because they weren't lending on anyone who looked to purchase a home in these areas. They would not. They refused and avoided giving you a mortgage opportunity in those areas. So if you didn't have the cash to buy it outright and you needed a loan, there was no bank at the time that would actually lend you a mortgage to buy that home. You could only go in other areas. And if you were someone that was Black or non-white, they would not work with you if you were looking to buy in those areas. And if you were looking to go into what was labeled as the best, they would make the term so outrageous that you could not purchase a home. They would ensure that you were not going to get a piece of that pie. But just to break down here, as such, property values in neighborhoods such as Durkeeville, they plummeted, while neighborhoods such as Riverside enjoyed access to fiscal tools that provided economic certainty. And we'll see here, let's blow this article up here. Let's see if I can blow this up. Yeah. All right. Let's see if this is showing up here. Okay, so as you see on this snippet from the article, it says the $1 million suburb. And I want to break down the this clip real quick because this is very interesting. That this is what they were advertising back then. All right, buy a home or home site here. It will mean much to you someday. And we're living in that someday right now. We are planning to build 1,000 Riverview homes. We have large commitment from the United States government through the FHA, 10 to 20 years to pay. We are preparing to meet the greater avalanche, it looks like greater avalanche of visitors and investors who ever visited Jacksonville and Florida. The big parade is on the way. I mean, they are selling it, right? They're selling it. We present here on the double face sheet a representation of America's greatest opportunities to the intelligent Caucasian race to own a beautiful home. Tax free. It's cut off here, but we know it says tax free home up to $5,000 on a 10 to 20-year plan to suit purchaser or investor in a few home sites that should double in value in the very near future. It is our intention to build 50 to 100 $3,000 to $5,000 homes in the Riverview, which means increases in valuation as new homes are built. We may build 1,000 more. I mean, they're selling it. Riverview's high rolling land, pretty riverfront, all city conveniences available to all parts. You're they're telling you how great it is. Water never stands on home sites in Riverview. It's close proximity to Jacksonville, only 10 to 15 minutes to Jacksonville's business center and the great federal building and post office, double bus transportation, public school, churches, already 100 pretty homes. Every picture shown here is a Riverview home. Good health and sanitation, liberal properties with our citizenship, all goes to make Riverview Jacksonville's most attractive suburb. Our water supply is one of the finest on earth, direct from the famous Good Hope Mineral Springs. Those who may desire a choice home site in Riverview where they can build a tax-free home, or we will build one for you under restricted property with all city convenience, or heavy investor or speculator who may wish to build 100 to 500 lots on a wholesale basis. We will be glad to negotiate with you. And this is an opportunity that and we see here it's highlighted, that they extended to the intelligent Caucasian race. Look at all the amenities that they're offering to the intelligent Caucasian race that they just failed to offer to anyone who was deemed in the hazard zone. Look at it. Look at it. Great amenities, right? I mean, you're great transportation sites, great water, good health, good sanitation. While those in the hazardous community had plants built on those communities, freeways and roads ran through their communities, decimated due to a thing called redlining. So when redlining took effect 7 years later, the practice further legitimized and perpetuated the existing racial segregation in housing by reinforcing then legal tools such as racially restrictive house covenants. And in numerous neighborhoods such as Riverside, these covenants which were attached to property deeds. So if you've ever seen those HOA communities, they have deeds. They call it a deed restricted community, but they have deeds and covenants of those homeowners associations that at the time were restricting. And I'm sure because a lot of those bylaws and covenants are still pretty private, who knows, it still may have some of these bylaws that restrict blacks from moving into these areas. But it directly prohibited property from being sold or even leased to blacks at that time. And like I said, who knows if it's still reflecting that to date? We don't know, unless you are able to become a member of the association and actually go through the hundreds, maybe even 1,000-page bylaws of the covenant and see what's in it. But the practice continued for another 30 years during a time when Jim Crow laws were also prolonging racial segregation. I just find this very interesting, this is very interesting. But as a mortgage pro, and as this being a part of my profession, I only want to bring awareness to this so folks do know and understand what's going on, and where this started from, and why it's such a challenge to get homes in certain areas where it shouldn't be as much of a challenge. It shouldn't be a challenge. And it breaks my heart to see that the FHA was in on it, and literally a government sponsored agency co-worked with the government to create maps that would actually discriminate against folks. And these maps are still relevant today, because we're going to dig into that also, that these maps are still relevant today, and it hurts my heart to see that, because redlining is something that still goes on, even though it shouldn't be going on. It's very, very, very sad, very sad. And that's why I want to bring this up again so you can see. Folks need to be able to see this, especially my folks in Duval County. Y'all need to be able to see this. Share this with your family. Share this with your friends. And I'm going to also bring up what the map looks like today, because there's still a map right now that was updated fairly recent. And although it doesn't have the same names, as you can see, this is a map from now. These areas are still red. They're still red. These red lines are still here. Although they may not go out and say that we're actively doing it, because the HO, let's check it out. Check it out. I think when was the HO? Uh, so let's see when the HOLC was actually terminated. It was terminated by order of the Home Loan Bank Board in 1954. So in 54, they terminated HOLC due to the redlining practices. But at this point, the damage had been done. Folks have been squeezed out. We're talking about what, 20, 30 years later, that they decided to terminate them. They already had enough time to draw up the maps. They already had enough time to create their map legend and label all the cities hazardous as they saw fit at the time. So, and today, as I'll show you on the Ameris Bank case, today they're still using these maps. They're just putting different labels instead of hazardous. They're using words like urban or urban core, um, inner city. They're changing those words up so it doesn't say hazardous. That's why I like to say we're in the refinement phase of discrimination. We're in the refinement phase where it's so good you can't see it. It's hidden. That's why the title is The Hidden History of Redlining, because right now it's hidden. Even then that was hidden. No one had access to these maps. We have it now because they terminated the HOLC. But I mean, everyone was in on it. The examiners partnered with mortgage brokers and loan officers and appraisers to ensure they devalued homes in this hazardous area. And upon my research, I was looking at a article where they literally were discussing um, that redlining was a war against the poor. And that's very disingenuous to those who are black and non-white to say that redlining was just a war against the poor. Yeah, I'm sure there were those that were in white communities, or those that come from white communities may have been impacted by redlining, but it was implemented and designed as a war against those that were non-white. Like, that's who were the majority in those areas. You're always going to have outliers in everything. There's always going to be outliers. Everywhere you go, you're going to see outliers. That's just what it is. That's how it goes. You'll see outliers everywhere. You're always going to see outliers. But the ultimate goal was to block out those that are in hazardous communities. And as we saw right here, as we see right here, hold on. Why is it? Oh, I'm going to share this one. As we see right here, there we go. These are the areas. I mean, to date, Moncrief has a notorious name. To date, that neighborhood has a notorious name. I remember being out here in the early 2000s and being told, hey, man, you keep your head on the swivel over there, man. Same with my folks on the east side over in